The dust on Ashkara never settled. It hung in the air like a dirty curtain, thick enough to taste red as dried blood. Commander Velatris stood in the center of what used to be a proud fortress, now reduced to broken stone and shattered dreams. Around her, the bodies of her soldiers lay scattered like fallen leaves after a storm. The Vorthak had come in waves, each one larger than the last, their chittering screams filling the air until there was no other sound in the world. She gripped her spear with both hands, feeling the weight of 15 generations in the ancient weapon. Her ancestors had carried this blade into battle, had won glory with it, had defended their people with honor. Now it would die with her. There were no reinforcements coming, no miracle waiting beyond the horizon, just her, 147 enemies, and the red dust that would soon cover her body. The Vorthak formed a circle around her, their insect bodies clicking and scraping as they moved. They were patient, these creatures. They knew she was trapped. Their warrior forms stood twice as tall as she did, with armor plating that gleamed black even in the dim light. Behind them, the massive war beast pawed at the ground, its 6 legs leaving deep gouges in the stone. She had seen that thing tear through a fortified wall like paper. Velatris raised her spear and began the death chant, the words her people had spoken for thousands of years when facing their final moments. Her voice carried across the broken fortress clear and proud. The Vorthak seemed to understand what she was doing. They waited. Even monsters could respect a warrior's last prayer. When she finished, she charged. There was no strategy left, no clever tactics to employ. Just the fury of a soldier who had lost everything and wanted to take as many enemies with her as possible. Her spear caught the first Vorthak in the throat, punching through the softer armor where the head met the body. The creature fell, black blood spraying across the stones. She pulled her weapon free and spun, catching another across the face. 2 down, 145 to go. The odds made her laugh, a sound that came out more like a sob. She had always known she would die in battle. The Kirin people were warriors, had been warriors since before they reached the stars. Death in combat was an honor. Death protecting others was the highest honor. But dying here on this forgotten world with no one left to protect felt hollow. The war beast charged. She could feel the ground shake under its weight, could smell the rotten stench of its breath. Velatris set her feet and aimed for its eye, knowing it was futile but unable to do anything else. Her spear struck true, burying itself deep in the creature's skull. For a moment she thought she had actually killed it. Then the war beast thrashed its head, and her ancestral spear, the weapon that had survived countless battles, snapped like a twig. The blade remained lodged in the creature's eye while she stumbled backward, holding nothing but a broken shaft of metal. The beast screamed, a sound that made her bones ache, and swung its massive head toward her. She raised her arms uselessly, knowing that in 2 seconds she would be dead. The sky caught fire. At first, she thought the Vorthak were bombarding the fortress from orbit, that they had decided to simply destroy everything rather than waste more soldiers, but the fire was falling. A single streak of orange and white that screamed across the red sky like a dying star. It hit the ground 300 meters away with a sound like thunder, sending up a cloud of dust and debris that washed over the battlefield. The Vorthak stopped. Even the war beast paused, its remaining eyes fixed on the crash site. For a long moment, nothing happened. The dust began to settle. Velatris could see the shape of a small vessel, an escape pod maybe, crumpled and smoking in the crater it had created. A hatch blew outward with a bang. Smoke poured from the opening, black and thick. Then a figure emerged, stumbling and coughing, and Velatris felt her breath catch in her throat. It was not Kirin, it was not Vorthak. It was not any species she recognized. The creature was shorter than her, its body covered in some kind of armored suit that was burned and torn in a dozen places. Its head was bare, showing pale skin and short dark hair. 2 eyes like hers, but different in some way she could not name. No tail, no natural armor, no obvious weapons. Just a being that looked fragile and soft and entirely out of place on this battlefield. It took 3 steps forward, then fell to one knee, coughing hard enough that she could see its whole body shake. One arm hung at a wrong angle, clearly broken. Blood ran down its face from a gash above its eye. By every measure, this creature should be dead or dying. Instead, it raised its head and looked directly at her. Then it smiled. Not a grimace or a snarl, but an actual smile, lips pulling back to show small, flat teeth. When it spoke, its voice was rough but carried across the silent battlefield with perfect clarity. "Mind if I join the fight?" Before Velatris could respond, before she could even process what was happening, the creature pulled a weapon from its belt and opened fire. The gun made a sharp, crackling sound, and 3 Vorthak warriors fell with smoking holes in their chests. The creature moved, rolling to one side as a plasma bolt scorched the ground where it had been standing. It came up firing, taking down 2 more enemies with shots so precise they might as well have been guided by fate itself. The Vorthak turned their attention to this new threat, confusion breaking their formation. Velatris watched in amazement as the creature ran directly at the war beast, the same monster that had broken her ancestral spear. It was suicide. The beast would crush this small being without even trying. The creature slid under the war beast's first strike, still firing its weapon into the softer armor of the beast's underbelly. Then it grabbed onto one of the creature's legs and pulled itself up, climbing the war beast like it was a mountain to be conquered. The beast thrashed and screamed, trying to shake off its attacker, but the strange being held on with grim determination. Velatris saw her chance. The broken shaft of her spear still had a sharp edge where it had snapped. She ran forward, ducking under the wild swings of the war beast's head, and drove the broken weapon into the creature's throat. The war beast staggered, its roar turning into a wet gurgle. The strange being jumped free just before the massive body crashed to the ground, landing in a roll and coming up with its weapon ready. For a moment, they stood back to back in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by enemies. Velatris held her broken spear. The stranger held its strange gun. The Vorthak circled, wary now, uncertain. They had come expecting to finish off one dying warrior. Now they faced 2 enemies who had just killed their war beast. The stranger looked over its shoulder at her, and she could see its face clearly now. It was young, she thought, though she had no frame of reference for this species. Its eyes were bright, alert, alive in a way that should not be possible given its injuries. When it spoke again, its voice held no fear, only a kind of reckless confidence that defied everything happening around them. "I'm Jake, by the way. Lieutenant Jake Murphy, Terran Coalition. Sorry about the rough entrance. You okay?" Velatris stared at this creature, this Jake Murphy from somewhere called the Terran Coalition, and felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. It was small, fragile, possibly foolish, but it was there, burning in her chest like a tiny star. "I am Velatris," she said, tightening her grip on her broken spear, commander of the Chiron warrior caste. "And yes, I am okay." Jake Murphy's smile widened. "Good. Because I've got maybe 10 shots left in this thing, and I count about 100 angry bugs between us and anywhere safe. You got a plan?" She looked at the Vorthak, at the broken fortress, at this strange being who had literally fallen from the sky. A plan? Yes, perhaps she did. For the first time in a very long time, perhaps she did. "Stay close," she said. "And try not to die." Jake laughed, actually laughed, in the middle of a battlefield surrounded by enemies. "I'll do my best, Commander." The Vorthak charged, and the battle began again. The ancient temple had seen better centuries. Half of its roof had collapsed, leaving the interior open to the red sky. Velatris sat against a wall, watching Jake Murphy work on his wounds with supplies from a small kit he carried. He moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping his broken arm in some kind of inflatable splint that hardened when he pressed a button on it. The gash above his eye got a spray of foam that sealed the wound almost instantly. She had questions. So many questions. But first they had needed to escape the Vorthak, and that had taken every bit of strength they both had left. Jake had led them through the ruins using paths that made no tactical sense, doubling back, climbing through difficult terrain, even crawling through a collapsed tunnel. The Vorthak had lost their trail within an hour. Velatris had spent 3 years fighting these creatures, and she had never managed to shake them so completely. "You fight without honor," she said finally, breaking the silence. Jake looked up from his work, one eyebrow raised. "I fight to win. Where I come from, staying alive is its own kind of honor. You ran from battle, multiple times." "I tactically retreated to advantageous positions," Jake corrected, his mouth quirking into a small smile. "Big difference." Velatris studied this human as he had called himself during their flight through the ruins. His species was new to her, and she prided herself on knowing the major civilizations of this sector. He was smaller than a Kirin, his frame lighter, his skin lacking any natural armor. Everything about him screamed fragile. Yet he had fought the war beast without hesitation, had moved through the battlefield like he was born to it. "Tell me about your people," she said. "This Terran coalition." Jake finished wrapping his arm and leaned back against the wall, wincing as he adjusted his position. Humans, we call ourselves humans. The Terran Coalition is our government, I guess, though it is more like a loose agreement between colonies than a real empire. We have been in space for about 200 years. Pretty new to the galactic scene. 200 years? Velatris could not keep the surprise from her voice. My people have sailed the stars for 15,000 years. Yeah, we are definitely the new kids on the block. Jake pulled a ration bar from his kit and broke it in half, offering one piece to her. She took it, more out of politeness than hunger. It tasted strange, sweet, and salty at once. But we learned fast, had to. Space is dangerous. How did you come to be here? On Ashkara? Jake's expression darkened. First contact mission gone wrong. We picked up signals from this sector, signs of advanced civilization. The Coalition sent a small fleet to make friendly introductions. We jumped into the system 3 weeks ago. He paused, staring at his hands. The Vorthak were waiting. They knew we were coming somehow. Had a whole battle group in position. We never stood a chance. Your ship? The Wanderer. Striker-class fast attack craft. Me and 8 others. Jake's voice went quiet. I was in the hangar doing maintenance when the first torpedoes hit. The captain ordered all hands to escape pods. I barely made it into one before the reactor went critical. Spent 2 days in that pod, listening to the distress beacon, hoping someone would pick up the signal. Then the pod's orbit decayed and I fell here. Velatris understood loss. She had lost her entire regiment, had watched soldiers she had trained and fought beside for years die one by one. But Jake had lost his whole crew in minutes, had spent days alone in a pod knowing that everyone he served with was dead. Yet here he sat, still smiling, still joking, still fighting. She did not understand how his mind worked. I am sorry for your loss, she said formally. Your crew died as warriors. They died because we were unprepared and outgunned, Jake said flatly. But thank you. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing through the ruins. Night was falling, and with it came the cold. Ashkara's thin atmosphere did not hold heat well. Velatris could already feel the temperature dropping. Your turn, Jake said. Tell me about the Kirin, and why you were making a last stand against 100 enemies with nothing but a spear. Velatris considered how to explain her people to this strange being. The Kirin are warriors. Have always been warriors. We believe in honor, in facing our enemies directly, in fighting with courage and skill. Our weapons are ceremonial, passed down through generations. To carry an ancestor's blade is to carry their spirit into battle. The spear that broke, Jake said softly. Yes, 15 generations, from my great-great-great-grandmother to me, and I broke it killing a beast. She could hear the bitterness in her own voice. You did not break it. You used it. That is what weapons are for. Jake shifted position, turning to face her directly. And you did not die, which means the spear did its job. Your ancestors would be proud. You do not understand. A warrior's weapon is sacred. To lose it is to lose a part of yourself. I understand that you are alive and those Vorthak are dead. Everything else is just details. Jake pulled out a small device and pressed a button. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of the surrounding area. I have been scanning since we got here. There is a Kirin fortress about 200 kilometers north. Big energy signatures, lots of activity. Your people? Velatris leaned forward, studying the map. The last stronghold. Commander Tharikson leads the defense there. He was my teacher many years ago. Can we reach it? Through Vorthak territory? Alone? She shook her head. It would take a miracle. Good thing I specialize in those. Jake grinned, and Velatris found herself almost smiling back. This human had a strange effect on her mood. We move at dawn. Travel during the day when we can see threats coming. Should take us 4, maybe 5 days if we are careful. The Vorthak patrol during the day. Then we will avoid them, or deal with them if we cannot. Jake stood, testing his balance. You know this planet better than me. I know how to move without being seen. Between us we might actually make it. Velatris stood as well, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at her limbs. She should be dead. By all rights, she should be lying in that fortress with the rest of her soldiers, her body feeding the red dust. Instead, she was alive, planning a journey through enemy territory with a being from a species she had never heard of until an hour ago. Why did you help me? She asked suddenly. You could have stayed hidden in your pod, waited for rescue. Why risk your life for a stranger? Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was serious in a way it had not been before. Because you were fighting alone and nobody should have to die alone. Because I saw a warrior making a last stand, and where I come from, that means something. Because maybe, just maybe, if we work together, we can both survive this mess. He met her eyes. Good enough reasons? Velatris thought about honor, about tradition, about everything she had been taught since she was old enough to hold a practice blade. Then she thought about Jake Murphy, climbing a war beast with a broken arm, laughing in the face of certain death, offering her half his ration bar without hesitation. Yes, she said. Good enough reasons. They took turns keeping watch through the night. Velatris had the first shift, sitting near the broken temple entrance with her broken spear across her lap. She watched Jake sleep, his breathing steady despite his injuries. Humans were strange. They fought without honor, ran from battle when it suited them, used tricks and deception instead of facing enemies directly. But Jake Murphy had not run from the war beast, had not hesitated to help her when any logical being would have stayed hidden, had shared his supplies, his plans, his trust with someone he had just met. Perhaps honor came in different forms. Perhaps tradition was not the only path to being a warrior. The thought was uncomfortable, like wearing armor that did not quite fit. But as she sat in the darkness, listening to the wind howl through the ruins, Velatris allowed herself to consider it. The Kirin had been fighting the Vorthak the same way for 3 years. They had been losing for 3 years. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to learn from a human who fell from the sky and asked to join a hopeless fight. When Jake woke for his watch shift, Velatris lay down and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she did not dream of defeat. The morning sun turned the sky from red to orange. Jake led the way through a canyon, moving slowly, checking corners before he rounded them. Velatris followed, trying to understand his method. He did not walk like a soldier. Soldiers marched with purpose, with pride in their bearing. Jake crept like a scavenger, using every bit of cover, pausing frequently to listen and watch. This is cowardice, she said. After the third time, he made them wait behind a rock formation for 10 minutes. This is not being dead, Jake replied without looking back. Big difference. They had been traveling for 2 days. In that time, they had seen 4 Vorthak patrols. Jake had avoided all of them, taking long detours around the enemy positions. Velatris had suggested attacking at least twice. Both times Jake had refused. 3 against 12 is bad odds, he had said about the first patrol. 2 against 8 is still bad odds, he had said about the second. Now, watching him check the same path 3 times before declaring it safe, Velatris felt frustration building in her chest. My people do not hide from enemies. Your people are dying, Jake said bluntly, finally turning to look at her. No offense, Commander, but the Vorthak are winning this war. Maybe it is time to try a different approach. There is no honor in running. There is no honor in being dead either. Jake started walking again, his tone gentler. Look, I get it. You were raised to fight a certain way. Face your enemies. Stand your ground. Never back down. It is brave and it is honorable, and it gets you killed when you are outnumbered. Better to die with honor than live with shame. Jake stopped walking and turned to face her fully. His expression was serious, almost sad. Is it? Because from where I am standing, you dying in that fortress would not have changed anything. The Vorthak would still control Ashkara. Your people would still be losing the war. The only difference is that you would not be here to help them. Velatris wanted to argue, but the words would not come. He was right, and she hated that he was right. Her death would have been meaningless. Just another body in a fortress full of bodies. The thought made her feel hollow. Then teach me, she said quietly. Teach me your way of war. Jake's smile returned, smaller this time but genuine. Okay, lesson 1. The best fight is the one you do not have. Lesson 2. If you have to fight, make sure you have every advantage before you start. Lesson 3. There is no such thing as fighting dirty. There is only winning and losing. They continued walking, and Jake began pointing out details she had never paid attention to before. The way the wind carried sound in this canyon, making it hard to hear approaching enemies. The loose rocks on the slope above them, perfect for starting an avalanche if they needed a distraction. The narrow parts of the path where a few defenders could hold off a much larger force. War is not just about courage, Jake explained. It is about geography, timing, psychology. You want to fight where the terrain helps you and hurts them. You want to attack when they are tired or distracted. You want to make them afraid, make them angry, make them stupid. Make them stupid? Scared people make mistakes. Angry people make mistakes. If you can control how your enemy feels, you can control how they fight. Jake picked up a rock and tossed it ahead of them, watching where it landed. The Vorthak are predictable. They rely on numbers and superior firepower. They expect enemies to either run or make a brave last stand. They do not expect someone to fake a retreat, lead them into a trap, and blow them up. Despite herself, Velatris found the idea interesting. The Chiron do not use traps. They are dishonorable. The Chiron are losing, Jake reminded her again. I am not saying abandon everything you believe. I am saying adapt, survive, win. Then you can go back to being honorable. That evening, they made camp in a cave. Jake showed her how to set up a perimeter using small sensors from his kit. The devices would vibrate if anything larger than a rock moved within 50 meters. Simple but effective. Tomorrow we will probably run into a patrol we cannot avoid, Jake said, checking his weapon. Down to 3 shots. We will need to do this smart. What do you suggest? Jake pulled out his holographic display and showed her the terrain ahead. There is a pass through the mountains. Narrow, lots of vertical space, perfect ambush location. We let them see us, make them chase us into the pass. Then we drop rocks on them from above. You want to use the environment as a weapon? Exactly. Why risk close combat when gravity can do the work for you? Jake zoomed in on a particular section of the pass. We will need to prepare the rock slide in advance. Move the right stones into position, set up triggers. When the patrol enters, we start the slide and finish off anyone who survives. Velatris studied the map. It was clever, she had to admit. The Vorthak would expect them to fight or flee. They would not expect the mountain itself to attack. How long to prepare? Few hours, maybe. We arrive at dawn, set up, then make ourselves visible. Should be done by midday. They worked through the details, and Velatris found herself seeing battle in a new way, not as a test of strength or courage, but as a problem to solve. How to use limited resources against superior numbers. How to turn disadvantages into advantages. How to win when winning seemed impossible. The next morning, they reached the pass exactly as planned. The narrow path cut through sheer cliffs with loose rock formations on both sides. Jake identified the key structural points, the places where one falling stone would trigger a cascade. They spent 3 hours moving rocks, setting up pressure triggers made from Jake's remaining equipment, creating a trap that looked natural until it was too late. When everything was ready, Jake checked his weapon one last time. Okay, time to get their attention. Remember, we want them angry enough to chase us, but not so angry they call for reinforcements. Let them see us, take a few shots, then run. Lead them into the center of the pass, then we climb. You go left, I go right. When they are in position, I will give the signal. What is the signal? I will yell now really loud. Hard to miss. Despite the danger, Velatris almost laughed. This human had the strangest way of making terrible situations seem less terrible. They did not have to wait long. A Vorthak patrol appeared within an hour, 6 warriors and a handler leading 2 tracked beasts. Jake stood up on a rock outcropping, making himself visible, and fired his weapon. The shot went wide deliberately, but it got their attention. The Vorthak screamed their hunting cry and charged. Jake ran with Velatris beside him. They sprinted into the pass, the sounds of pursuit close behind. The narrow walls amplified every noise, making it sound like an army was chasing them. Velatris forced herself not to look back, trusting Jake's plan. Now! Jake shouted, and they both veered toward the cliff walls, climbing the handholds they had prepared. Below them, the Vorthak patrol entered the kill zone. Jake kicked the first trigger stone. It fell, hitting another, which hit another. The effect was beautiful and terrible. Tons of rock poured down from both sides of the pass, burying the Vorthak under an avalanche of stone and dust. The noise was deafening. When it finally stopped, the pass was blocked by rubble and nothing moved below. They climbed down carefully, checking for survivors. There were none. 6 Vorthak warriors and 2 beasts, eliminated without a single shot fired in close combat. Jake was breathing hard, his face pale. That was lesson 4. Use every weapon available to you, even if it is not a weapon. Velatris looked at the blocked pass, at the efficiency of the kill, at the way Jake had turned the terrain itself into a devastating weapon. She thought about honor, about facing enemies directly, about the traditional Kirin way of battle. Then she thought about results. 6 enemies dead, 0 friendly casualties. a strategic position now denied to the Vorthak. If she had fought honorably directly, both she and Jake would likely be dead and the patrol would have reported their position. "Your way of war is effective," she said slowly. "But it feels wrong, like I am betraying my ancestors." Jake climbed down beside her, his expression understanding. "You are not betraying them. You are evolving. Do you think your ancestors fought the same way their ancestors did? Did they use the same weapons, the same tactics? Probably not. They adapted to survive. That is what warriors do. They learn, they grow, they find new ways to protect their people. But honor is only meaningful if you live long enough to practice it," Jake finished. "Listen, Commander. Your honor is beautiful. Your traditions are valuable. But they are also predictable. And the Vorthak have learned to use that against you. Adapting does not mean losing who you are. It means becoming who you need to be to win." They continued walking, the fortress now only a day away. Bellatrix was quiet, processing everything she had learned. Jake was right. The old ways were not working. The Kirin were losing, slowly but surely, because they refused to change their approach. Because honor mattered more than victory. But what was the point of honor if there was no one left to practice it? That night, as they made camp, Bellatrix made a decision. She would learn this human way of war. She would set aside her discomfort with deception and ambush and tactical retreat, not because she wanted to, but because her people needed her to, because survival was its own kind of honor. "Thank you," she said to Jake as he took the first watch. "For what?" "For showing me that there is more than one way to be a warrior." The fortress rose from the red plains like a mountain made by hands instead of nature. Its walls reached 50 meters high, built from dark stone that had withstood centuries of weather and war. Bellatrix felt her heart's lift at the sight of it, home, or as close to home as existed on this cursed world. Then, she saw the Vorthak siege lines. Thousands of them surrounded the fortress in 3 complete circles. Artillery positions pounded the walls day and night, their heavy weapons sending cracks through stone that had stood for 500 years. Supply trenches snaked back toward the Vorthak main camp. This was not a battle. It was execution, slow and methodical. "That is a lot of bugs," Jake said quietly, lying beside her on the ridge overlooking the fortress. "Getting in will be interesting." "We will not get in," Bellatrix said, her earlier hope draining away. "Not through that. We do not go through. We go under." Jake pointed to a section of the siege line. "See that supply trench? Connects to their main camp. I bet they dug deep to avoid your people's sensors. If we can get into it, we follow it backward, then surface inside the siege ring. From there we move at night, stay low and pray your people do not shoot us when we reach the walls." It was insane, crawling through enemy trenches, surfacing in the middle of a war zone, then crossing open ground to reach the fortress. 1,000 things could go wrong. Bellatrix opened her mouth to say this was impossible. Then she remembered the pass, the rock slide. Jake's face as he explained that the best fight was one you did not have. His way of war had kept them alive for 5 days. Maybe she should trust it for one more day. "We try at dusk," she said. "The Vorthak see poorly in low light." Dusk works. They spent the day watching the siege lines, learning the patterns of patrol changes, identifying weak points in the Vorthak perimeter. Jake took notes on his holographic display, marking positions, timing movements. Bellatrix was impressed by his thoroughness. He treated reconnaissance like an art form. As the sun began to set, they moved. Getting into the trench was easier than expected. The Vorthak were focused on the fortress, not on threats from outside their lines. Jake and Bellatrix slipped down the ridge, crossed 200 meters of open ground during a gap in the patrol schedule, and dropped into the trench without being seen. The trench smelled of decay and chemicals. The Vorthak left waste everywhere they went, and the concentrated stench in the enclosed space made Bellatrix gag. Jake seemed unbothered, moving forward with his weapon ready. The trench was empty, as he predicted. The Vorthak were not expecting infiltration from outside the siege. They traveled through darkness, feeling their way along the trench walls. Twice they heard Vorthak voices above them and froze, waiting for the patrol to pass. It took 2 hours to reach a point Jake judged to be inside the siege ring. They climbed out carefully, emerging into a nightmare landscape of craters and broken machinery. The ground between the siege line and the fortress walls was a killing field. Nothing lived here. Nothing moved except during the brief moments when the Kirin made sorties or the Vorthak attempted assaults. They waited until full dark, then began crawling forward, moving from crater to crater using wreckage as cover. They were halfway across when the artillery barrage started again. The sound was overwhelming and the ground shook with each impact. Velatris pressed herself flat, feeling the heat of near misses, tasting dust and fire. Beside her, Jake was cursing in his language, words she did not understand but whose meaning was universal. A shell hit 20 meters away. The blast wave picked them both up and threw them like toys. Velatris landed hard, her vision blurring, her ears ringing. She could not hear, could not think. She tried to stand and fell. Tried again and managed to get to her knees. Someone grabbed her arm. Jake, his face covered in blood, his mouth moving but no sound reaching her damaged hearing. He pulled her forward, half dragging her toward the fortress wall. Another shell hit behind them. Then another. They were in the middle of the bombardment and the only choice was forward or death. The wall loomed above them, impossibly tall. Jake was pounding on it with his fist, shouting something. Velatris realized he was trying to signal the defenders. She joined him, both of them beating on the stone, praying someone would notice. A small door opened at the base of the wall, barely visible in the darkness. Hands reached out, pulling them inside. The door slammed shut, and suddenly the noise of battle was muffled, distant. Velatris lay on cold stone, breathing hard, her body screaming with pain. She looked up to see a dozen Chiron warriors surrounding them, weapons pointed, faces hostile. Then one stepped forward and Velatris recognized him despite his aged features. "Commander Tharixon," she gasped. The old warrior stared at her, his face showing shock, then joy, then confusion as he looked at Jake. "Velatris, you live, and what is this creature you bring to my fortress?" Getting to the command chamber took time. Both she and Jake needed medical attention, though Jake insisted his injuries were minor. The Kirin healers disagreed, especially about his broken arm, which had been set poorly and was not healing correctly. They forced him into a medical pod despite his protests, promising he would be released within the hour. Tharixon listened to Velatris's story in his command chamber, a large room carved from the heart of the fortress. Maps covered the walls, showing the slow contraction of Kirin territory across Ashkara. The old warrior's face grew darker as she spoke. "A human," he said when she finished. "I have heard reports of a new species in this sector. Young, aggressive, technologically advanced. I did not expect to meet one here. He saved my life multiple times, and his way of fighting is different from ours. Effective. Different how?" Velatris explained the rock slide, the ambush tactics, the emphasis on avoiding unnecessary combat. Tharkisson's expression grew more skeptical with each detail. "This is not how warriors fight," he said firmly. "What you describe is the behavior of scavengers and cowards. It is the behavior of survivors," Velatris countered. "Teacher, I respect you above all others. You trained me, shaped me into the warrior I am. But we are losing this war using our traditional methods. Perhaps it is time to learn from someone who fights differently. You would have me abandon 15,000 years of Chiron honor. I would have you adapt so that the Kirin survive another 15,000 years. Before Tharixon could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the fortress. A junior officer burst into the room, her face pale. "Commander, major assault!" 3 war beasts and at least 500 warriors. "They are hitting the north gate." Tharixon stood, reaching for his ancestral blade. "Summon all defenders to the walls. We will show these creatures what Kirin honor means." Velatris followed him, her heart sinking. She knew how this would go. The defenders would meet the assault with traditional tactics, formation fighting, standing their ground. They would kill many Vorthak, but they would lose ground, lose soldiers, and eventually the gate would fall. It was how every battle had gone for 3 years. They reached the north wall just as the assault hit. 3 war beasts, each the size of the one Velatris had faced, smashed into the gate. Behind them, Vorthak warriors swarmed like a black tide. The Kirin defenders formed shield walls, their spears ready, their formation perfect. It was not enough. The war beasts broke through the first line, their massive bodies crushing warriors. The Vorthak poured through the breach, and suddenly the battle was inside the fortress. Tharixon led a countercharge, his blade singing through the air. But for every enemy that fell, 2 more took their place. Jake appeared beside Velatris, fresh from the medical pod, his arm in a new splint. He took one look at the battle and shook his head. "They are fighting the wrong way. How would you fight it? I would not let them get this close to begin with." "I would—" Jake paused, his eyes widening. "Wait, I have an idea." Where is your power distribution center? Why, just tell me. Velatris pointed to a tower on the eastern side of the fortress. Jake grabbed her arm and started running. Come on, we can still save this. They sprinted through corridors, dodging wounded soldiers and running civilians. Jake was moving with purpose, his earlier injuries seemingly forgotten. They reached the power center and Jake immediately began examining the systems. What are you doing? Velatris demanded. Creating a distraction. Jake's fingers flew across the control panel. Your fortress has directed energy shields for the walls, right? Anti-artillery barriers. Yes, but they drain power too quickly to keep active during prolonged bombardment. What if we redirected all shield power to one point? Maximum intensity concentrated burst? Jake pulled up a schematic. We make the north gate shields overload in a massive energy discharge. It will knock out everyone near the gate, friend and foe. Then your people counterattack while the Vorthak are stunned. That is insane. Our own soldiers will be harmed. Your soldiers are dying right now. This gives them a chance. Jake met her eyes. Trust me. Velatris thought about honor, about tradition, about the proper way to fight. Then she thought about Tharixon, about the soldiers giving their lives in a losing battle, about the fortress that would fall if nothing changed. Do it, she said. Jake entered a series of commands, rerouting power from across the fortress. The lights dimmed. Environmental systems shut down. Every bit. The training grounds had not been used for their original purpose in months. Now they were filled with Kirin warriors learning to forget everything they knew about combat. Jake stood on a raised platform shouting instructions while demonstrating techniques that made the traditionalists wince. Stop thinking like targets, he yelled at a group attempting a tactical retreat drill. You are not running away. You are repositioning to a better fighting location. There is a difference. Velatris watched from the side, assisting where needed, translating when Jake's explanations confused the soldiers. It had been 3 days since Tharixon granted permission for this training. 3 days of breaking down centuries of tradition and building something new. The older warriors resisted. The younger ones adapted more easily, seeing the value in Jake's methods. A soldier named Peltara had become Jake's unofficial assistant. She was young, barely 20 cycles with a quick mind and none of the rigid thinking that plagued her elders. She picked up Jake's tactics faster than anyone, even suggesting improvements that made him laugh with delight. You are a natural at this, he told her, after she successfully planned an ambush scenario that fooled even Velatris. Ever considered a career in tactical command? I considered staying alive, Peltara replied with a grim smile. Your methods help with that. The training was brutal. Jake pushed them through exercises in camouflage and moving silently, and using terrain for advantage. He taught them to think about timing, about catching enemies when they were tired or distracted. He showed them how to fake retreats, how to lead enemies into prepared kill zones, how to coordinate attacks using simple communication signals. Most importantly, he taught them to abandon the idea of honorable, face-to-face combat. The Vorthak know how you fight, he explained during one session. They have studied you for 3 years. They know your formations, your tactics, your weapons. Every time you fight the traditional way, you are doing exactly what they expect. You need to become unpredictable. But our honor, one of the older warriors began, will not matter if you are all dead, Jake interrupted. I am not asking you to become dishonorable. I am asking you to survive, to win, to protect your people. Is that not the highest honor? The question silenced the objections, because Jake was right and they all knew it. The traditional methods had failed. The fortress was surrounded, supplies were running low, and without help they would fall within weeks. They needed something different. They needed to learn. Tharixon spent his remaining strength observing the training. The old commander said little, but Velatris saw approval in his eyes as the soldiers began to move differently, think differently, fight differently. On the 5th day, he called Jake and Velatris to his quarters. The old warrior looked worse each time they saw him. His skin had taken on a gray tint and he moved with obvious pain. But his mind remained sharp, his voice steady. I am impressed with what you have accomplished, he said to Jake. In less than a week, you have changed how my soldiers think about warfare. That is no small achievement. They are good students, Jake replied. They want to win. That makes teaching easy. I have one final request before I die. Tharixon pulled up a holographic map of the fortress and surrounding terrain. The Vorthak supply depot is here, 15 kilometers south. It feeds their entire siege operation. If we could destroy it, their assault would stall for weeks, long enough for reinforcements to arrive from other Chiron worlds. You want me to plan a raid? Jake said, studying the map. I want you to lead one. Take Velatris, Peltara, and 40 of our best soldiers. Destroy that depot. Show the Vorthak that the Chiron have learned to bite back. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. Commander, I'm a pilot, not an infantry officer. I have been making this up as I go, hoping I do not get everyone killed. Leading a major raid? You have kept yourself and Velatris alive through Vorthak territory for 5 days, Tharixon interrupted. You infiltrated a siege line that should have been impossible to penetrate. You saved this fortress with quick thinking and courage. You are exactly who I need for this mission. What if I fail? Then you fail honorably trying to save my people. There is no shame in that. The old warrior's voice softened. Jake Murphy of the Terran Coalition, you came to us as a stranger. You could have hidden, waited for rescue, protected only yourself. Instead, you chose to fight beside us. That makes you more than a stranger. That makes you family, and I trust my family to do what needs to be done. Velatris saw Jake's expression shift, something vulnerable showing through his usual confidence. She realized that he had lost his crew, had been alone for weeks, had thrown himself into helping the Chiron partly to avoid thinking about his own losses. Now Tharixon was offering him something precious, belonging. I will not let you down, Jake said quietly. I know you will not. Tharixon smiled. Now go, plan your raid. Make it spectacular. They spent 2 days preparing. Jake studied the depot layout using long-range scans, identifying weak points, planning approach routes, establishing fallback positions. He divided the 40 soldiers into 8 teams, each with specific objectives. Peltara would lead the demolitions team. Velatris would command the primary assault force. Jake would coordinate overall strategy and handle the technical aspects of destroying the depot's power core. The plan was complex, relying on timing, coordination, and simultaneous strikes on multiple targets. It was the kind of operation that required every element to work perfectly. Jake spent hours going over details with each team leader, making sure everyone understood their role. On the morning they were scheduled to depart, word came that Tharixon had died in his sleep. The old warrior had spent his final reserves of strength, planning one last strike against the enemy. The fortress mourned, but there was no time for extended ceremonies. Tharixon would have wanted them to focus on the mission. They left at dusk, 42 warriors moving through the siege lines using the same trench infiltration method that had worked before. The Vorthak still had not adjusted their perimeter security, still focused all their attention on the fortress rather than external threats. Jake found this both useful and concerning. An enemy that refused to learn from mistakes was dangerous in its predictability. The journey to the depot took 6 hours. They moved in complete silence using hand signals Jake had taught them, stopping frequently to avoid patrols. Twice they had to hide while Vorthak transports passed overhead. Each time, Jake's careful timing kept them undetected. The depot was massive, a sprawling complex of storage facilities, barracks, and support buildings. Jake had estimated 200 defenders. The reality looked closer to 300. He gathered the team leaders and adjusted the plan, redistributing forces, changing the attack sequence. Remember, he said before they split up, speed and surprise are everything. Hit hard, hit fast, and get out before they can organize a response. If anything goes wrong, fall back to Rally Point Alpha. Do not try to be heroes. We destroy the depot and leave. That is the mission. The teams moved into position. Velatris led her assault force to the main gate. Peltara took her demolitions experts toward the power core. The other teams spread out, targeting communications arrays, vehicle depots, and ammunition storage. Jake positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the complex, his captured Vorthak rifle modified to send the attack signal. He watched through his scope as everyone reached their positions. Then he fired 3 shots into the air, the signal to begin. The depot erupted into chaos. Velatris's team hit the main gate with shaped charges, blowing the entrance open and storming inside. Peltara's group cut through the perimeter fence and sprinted toward the power core building. The other teams struck their targets simultaneously, creating confusion about where the main attack was coming from. Jake provided overwatch, picking off Vorthak officers trying to organize a defense. His modified rifle had better range and accuracy than the Vorthak expected, and he used it to devastating effect. He counted shots carefully, making each one matter. Peltara reached the power core and set her charges. The demolitions were sophisticated, designed to cause a cascading failure rather than a simple explosion. When they detonated, the entire depot would lose power, and the backup systems would overload trying to compensate. Velatris fought her way to the central command post, her team moving like the well-trained unit Jake had shaped them into. They used cover, coordinated their fire, supported each other. The Vorthak defenders fought bravely, but were overwhelmed by tactics they had never encountered from Kirin warriors. Everything was going according to plan. Then the Vorthak reinforcements arrived. 3 troop transports dropped from the sky, disgorging fresh warriors directly into the depot. Jake's carefully timed assault suddenly faced twice the expected enemy force. He grabbed his communicator and sent the abort signal, 3 short bursts that meant fall back immediately. But Peltara's team was still inside the power core building. If they left now, the charges would not be set and the mission would fail. Velatris saw the problem and made a decision. She split her force, sending half toward the extraction point and taking the rest toward the power core to provide cover for Peltara. Jake watched from his ridge, his heart pounding. This was the moment. The Vorthak dreadnought appeared in orbit like a malevolent moon. It was 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, its hull scarred from countless battles. The ship had a name among the Kirin, Worldbreaker. It had destroyed 2 Kirin colonies before coming to Ashkara. Now it hung in the sky above the fortress, and everyone who saw it understood what it meant. The siege was over. Now came the execution. Jake stood in the command center, watching the dreadnought's power readings climb. They were charging their orbital bombardment cannons, preparing to reduce the fortress to molten slag. He had maybe 2 hours before they fired. 2 hours to find a solution to a problem that seemed impossible. "We should evacuate," one of the senior commanders said. "Get as many people out as we can before the bombardment begins." "The Vorthak control all approaches to the fortress," another replied. "Anyone who leaves will be cut down in minutes. Then we die here with honor," a third said. "As warriors should." Jake tuned out the argument and focused on his holographic display. There had to be something, some weakness they could exploit. The dreadnought was powerful, but nothing was invincible. Every ship had vulnerabilities. He just needed to find them. "What about the old orbital defense platforms?" Peltara asked, appearing at his shoulder. She had become his constant companion over the past weeks, learning everything he could teach her about human tactical thinking. "What platforms?" "The ones the Kirin built 5 centuries ago when we first settled Ashkara. They were state-of-the-art then, but technology advanced and we abandoned them. They should still be in orbit." Peltara pulled up historical records. "Here, 12 platforms positioned around the planet. Most are probably not functional anymore, but maybe 1 or 2. Jake grabbed her shoulders, startling her. "You are brilliant. Get me everything you have on those platforms. Schematics, power systems, weapon types, everything." While Peltara gathered information, Jake turned to Velatris. "I need to get to one of those platforms. Can you find me a ship? We have 3 shuttles left. All damaged, but one might fly." Velatris studied him. "What are you planning?" "Something stupid and desperate. So basically a normal day." Jake tried to smile, but his face would not cooperate. He was terrified, and trying to hide it was pointless. "If those platforms still have power, I might be able to bring their weapons online. Use them against the dreadnought." "Might. The platforms are 500 years old and have been abandoned for centuries. I have no idea if they will work. But it is better than sitting here waiting to die." The commanders stopped arguing and turned to face him. One of them, an older warrior named Catherine, shook his head. "The platforms were built by our ancestors. Only Kirin technology can interface with them." "Maybe," Jake said. "Or maybe whoever built them used similar principles to human systems. I have noticed some similarities between Kirin and human technology. Not enough to be coincidence. Maybe we share some common ancestor. Or maybe there was contact between our species long ago. Either way, I have to try." Velatris made her decision quickly. "I am going with you." "No, you are needed here. If this does not work, the fortress will need its best commander to organize the final defense." "I am going with you," she repeated, her voice allowing no argument. "You saved my life. Now I save yours. That is how this works." Jake looked at her, saw the determination in her eyes, and knew he could not change her mind. Fine, but if we die up there, I'm blaming you. Deal. They prepared quickly. Peltara brought the platform schematics, loading them into Jake's portable display. The maintenance crew got the shuttle flight ready, patching holes with whatever materials they had available. It would not win any safety awards, but it might survive the trip to orbit. Peltara insisted on coming too. Someone needs to handle the weapon systems while you work on getting the platform online. I am the best shot you have trained. You are also too valuable to risk, Jake protested. The fortress is about to be destroyed by orbital bombardment. Nowhere is safe. At least in space, I can help. She grabbed her gear and climbed into the shuttle before he could argue further. The shuttle launched through a gap in the Vorthok siege line, using the planet's magnetic field to mask its energy signature. It was another trick Jake had taught them, another piece of human tactical knowledge grafted onto Chiron warfare. The launch was rough, the shuttle shaking like it would tear apart, but it held together through sheer stubbornness. In orbit, they could see the full scope of the Vorthok fleet. Dozens of ships all positioned to prevent any escape from the planet, and above them all the dreadnought, its weapons charging with patient malevolence. Jake brought up the platform locations and selected the nearest one. It was on the far side of the planet, which meant they had to keep low and fast to avoid detection. The shuttle's stealth systems were primitive by human standards, but they were better than nothing. The platform appeared ahead of them, a massive structure that looked like a cross between a weapon and a space station. It had been impressive once, but centuries of neglect showed in every surface. Hull panels were missing, systems were dark, and debris floated around it like a metal cloud. That is your plan? Velatris said quietly. That wreck? Sometimes wrecks can still bite, Jake replied, guiding the shuttle toward a docking port that looked intact. Besides, we are out of better options. Docking was an adventure. The automated systems were dead, forcing Jake to manually align the shuttle with an ancient airlock that had not been used in 500 years. He held his breath as the seals engaged, praying they would hold. When the pressure reading stabilized, he let himself breathe again. They entered the platform wearing emergency suits, not trusting the ancient life support. The interior was dark except for their lights, all power long since drained. Jake made his way to the central control room, following the schematics Peltara had provided. The control room was eerily preserved. Dust covered everything, but the equipment looked intact, frozen in time. Jake approached the main terminal and studied it. The interface was different from human systems, but the underlying logic was familiar. Very familiar, almost like whoever designed this had used the same basic principles that human engineers would later discover. I need power, he said. Is there an auxiliary reactor? Peltara checked the schematics. 2 levels down. Auxiliary fusion reactor designed for emergency backup. If it has fuel, it should still work. They split up. Peltara and Velatris went to restart the reactor, while Jake worked on interfacing his portable computer with the ancient terminal. It was slow, frustrating work, requiring him to build translation protocols on the fly, but gradually he began to understand the system's language. 20 minutes later, the platform shuddered as the auxiliary reactor came online. Emergency lighting flickered to life, dim but functional. Jake's terminal screen lit up, displaying status information in a language he could barely read. He connected his translator and began the process of understanding what he was looking at. The weapon systems were offline. Main power was at 3%. Targeting sensors were non-functional. Life support was marginal. By every measure, the platform was a dead hulk with a working reactor. But Jake had not survived this long by accepting defeat easily. He rerouted all available power to the weapons systems, stripped code from non-essential functions, and began a manual startup sequence that the platform's designers had probably never intended to use. His fingers flew across the terminal, part improvisation, part desperate hope. Jake. Velatris's voice came through his communicator, tense with urgency. The dreadnought is accelerating its charge sequence. You have maybe 30 minutes. Working on it. The weapon systems began powering up, slower than he wanted, but faster than he had any right to expect. Ancient capacitors charged, centuries-old machinery groaning back to life. Warning lights flashed across the display, showing dozens of system failures and malfunctions. Jake ignored them and focused on the primary weapon array. Peltara reached the control room, breathless. Targeting sensors are dead. How do you plan to aim these weapons? Manual targeting. Jake pulled up an external view of the planet and the dreadnought's position. We use visual tracking and basic geometry. I calculate the trajectory, you adjust for drift. We fire everything at once and hope something hits. That is insane. Welcome to human tactical planning. Jake began calculating firing solutions, using his portable computer to compensate for orbital mechanics, target movement, and platform drift. The math was complex, but he had trained for this at the academy, back when he thought his biggest problem would be pirates, not alien dreadnoughts. The weapons finished charging. Jake had 4 main cannons operational, each one capable of punching through heavy armor if the shot landed. He loaded his firing solution into the targeting system and gave Peltara control of the final adjustments. On my mark, he said, watching the dreadnought through the external cameras. 3, 2, 1, mark! Peltara fired. 4 beams of concentrated energy lanced across space, brilliant against the darkness. For a moment nothing happened, and Jake thought they had missed. Then the first shot struck the dreadnought's forward shield, overloading it in a cascade of light. The second shot hit bare hull, burning through armor. The third shot missed. The fourth shot. 3 days after the platform battle, the sensors went crazy. Jake was in the command center, working on repair schedules for the shuttle, when every alarm in the fortress started blaring. Velatris arrived seconds later, followed by Peltara and the senior commanders.